They told me for years there was no money in podcasting. Well, they were all wrong.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. I am the man of the hour, Will Tarashuk from the Ambiguous Podcast Solutions. But this is not the Ambiguous Podcast Solution, which you've probably been hearing a lot of me on. This is Talking with Tarashuk. And today I am speaking with Mark Herschberg. He is the author of The Career Toolkit, Essential Skills for Success That No One Taught You. It is very interesting career Mark has, from tracking criminals and terrorists on the dark web to creating marketplaces and new authentication systems. Don't know how they're connected, but I'm going to find out. Mark has also spent his career launching and developing new ventures at startups and Fortune 500s in academia. He also helped start the Undergraduate Practice Opportunities Program at MIT. He has a Bachelor's of Science in Physics, Electrical Engineering, and Computer Science, as well as a Master's in Electrical Engineering and Computer Science, focusing on cryptography. So, no big deal. Mark, that is one hell of a resume. I don't know where to start, but first off, welcome. How are you, friend?
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so you have been on 200 podcasts. I didn't bring that up in your impressive resume, so that's interesting. That's a lot to get into. But before we even get there, just, tell me who you are, where you're from, what it is you do currently, because you've had an extensive career.
Yeah, I do a couple different things. I have my primary career. So I've been a startup CTO for most of my career. I go into startup companies. I'm the chief technology officer, the head nerd, and I help build startup companies. We scale them up. I've helped some Fortune 500 companies who wanted to play startup. Right now, I've been working as a fractional CTO. So I'm a part-time CTO at a few different companies. That's my main job. But after teaching at this class for the past 20 years at MIT and teaching this content elsewhere, I turned into the book you mentioned, The Career Toolkit, and that came out earlier this year. So I've had this side career of the teaching and now the book and all the podcasts and everything that goes with it. So I think myself having two parts to who I am professionally.
So how do you bounce around just from industry to industry? Because electrical engineering, physics, I guess those kind of go together. And then, going from a CTO helping startups, like how do those go hand in hand? Because they kind of don't.
Well, I began my career as a software engineer.
Okay.
Because one of my degrees is computer science. So I started as a programmer and then realized I wanted the challenges that come with being an executive. So I pushed my career forward to get to that management level. And once you become an executive, it can be easier to go from one industry to another when there's a common thread. In my case, we create software products. And so I can create software products in different types of industries, allowing me to move around.
So the T is Chief Technology Officer, right?
That's
essentially right. Technology Officer. Okay. All right. So let's read over that. Let's lead over that resume again. Let's go point by point. Tracking criminals on the dark web. Explain. Please elaborate. Please.
My graduate work was in cryptography. Now that's a branch of mathematics that does secret codes. It's what the NSA and CIA does. It's also what you use every time you enter your credit card and say, well, I don't have to worry. It's safe.
Right.
It's because people in my field create ways to save you and secure your data. Most of the companies, we build products like antivirus or firewalls. In this particular case, there's a company that was more proactive. So we were doing intelligence gathering on the dark web, and we had to go out and find out who are the bad guys, the terrorists, the cyber criminals. Who are they? Because they don't want to be found.
Right.
What are they trying to do? When, where, how are they doing this? And we would do that intelligence gathering and then take that data and sell it to companies and government organizations.
I'm sure you made a lot of money selling that stuff to government.
Government certainly.
Government always pays.
They write big checks.
Yeah. That's the thing about government contracts. They always pay. So is this more like Silk Road or more cyber crimes? Because Silk Road was essentially just Amazon without limits.
Well, it's all of the above, because if on Silk Road, they are selling credit cards, if they are selling human trafficking, that wasn't one of our bigger areas, but there are illegal things being sold online. There are people gathering to plan illegal activities online. So we would just get any and all information we could find, package it up in different ways so that our customers could use it to better prepare their defenses or for government agencies, some offensive capabilities.
So did you ever work directly in government, or is this all privately funded?
I have never been directly employed by the government, although the government has funded certain research I've done while at university and other employers.
Yeah, it's the difference of working with the government and working for the government. Like, the government doesn't pay you to work for them. The government's paying you for a service.
Exactly.
Right.
Less red tape that way.
Yeah, no, that's very important to distinguish. Yeah, I'm sure we could do a lot on the dark web. So, like, because the dark web, even like, scammers, hackers, they're always 5 steps ahead, no matter what you do. Like, when LimeWire was on the way of going down, the Pirate Bay was already up 3 months prior. So, like, how do you keep up with online criminals? Because it's very, very hard, and they're very, very smart.
Well, the way to think about it is you have your life where you're running a podcast, you're helping with others, you go out to dinner with friends, you do other things, worrying about your online privacy, worrying about your home safety. That is, let's say, 1% of your time. But for a criminal, that's their full-time job. How do I break into your house? How do I get your online information? So they're spending a lot more resources on it, their own resources, than you are. Now, thankfully, there are tools put out. There are locks for your door. There are alarm companies. And of course, we have digital versions of that as well from companies who recognize you don't want to spend a lot of time on it, so they try to automate as much as they can for you. But it is a cat and mouse game. The criminals are always saying, okay, what can we do next? And then the defensive companies say, what are the criminals doing? How do we respond to that? And it's just constant cat and mouse.
What did you think of I know we're recording this November 1st, but what did you think of that Facebook when their servers just went down about earlier in October, when like for 5 hours, just the whole day was just gone? Like, what do you make of that? Because, I heard the story that, their servers are so secure that there's like one person who has a physical key to get into the server room. And the reason they were down for so long is because they couldn't get into the building with all the servers, all the rooms. And they didn't have the guy's phone number because Facebook requires the employees to contact each other through Messenger. So no one had his physical phone number to call the guy and say, hey, come open the door and so we can fix the servers. So he probably found out what was happening on the news. Like, from like a cybersecurity, what were your thoughts? 'Cause that's probably just a nightmare. Or are you sitting back going, ha, yes, my time to shine?
Well, it was an operational failure on their point. At least from what I've read, it wasn't some hacker got in. To your point, that's like saying, well, we only have one key. Well, what happens if you lose the key? Right? What happens if the guy who has the key is on vacation and now you break into his house? It's important whenever you're working on your own plans, your own defense at your company, you actually run through this. Remember, as kids, we used to do fire drills. Right? The teachers say, okay, kids, we're going to hear the fire alarm. Let's all practice lining up. And this way, when you did hear a fire alarm, I've certainly heard them as an adult, I didn't run for the exits. I knew not to, I could walk calmly. I didn't get into the elevator. I took the stairs. We know what to do. We've practiced this.
Right.
And companies who have the capacity will practice, we call them fire drills, but it could be, let's pretend a server crashed. Let's pretend there was a breach. Clearly, they never practiced this, or they would have realized there's only one key, and we can't get to the key under this circumstance. Yeah. So I think they learned a lot from that, and will hopefully update their practices. That's
a very good point. It's a very good lesson to take away with cybersecurity, or any type of security for that matter. You prepare for so long to say, okay, what can we do to make sure this never happens, that you forget to prepare for what happens when it does. Right. And that's pretty much what happened. I think a lot of companies run into that issue because, I'm listening right here as security, and, as APS grows and, we have more people on a platform, security is going to be an issue.
Yeah. There's different things you can do. Famously, Netflix had something they created called Chaos Monkey. So Netflix created a service that would just crash servers arbitrarily, because Netflix is a 24/7 service. When I've run certain businesses, we know we're mostly 9 to 5. Yeah, maybe someone's on at 2 a.m., but if we had to take down our system at 2 a.m., okay, who cares? You put up like, hey, come back tomorrow, no one cares. Yeah. Netflix can't stop at 2 a.m. There's probably a lot of business happening at 2 a.m. So Netflix said, look, we just have to create such a robust system. We're going to actively just be messing with our system just a little bit. And you should be able to build systems that are self-healing, systems that can immediately respond. And if it can't handle the small chaos that we throw in, then we know we're in trouble for big chaos later. So they took a different approach. A lot of companies will do what's called tabletop exercises. Let's all sit around and practice. Those who are fans of Parks and Rec, there was an episode where they said, okay, we're going to pretend the town has some type of earthquake or flood, and they've got everyone together and say, okay, 911, what do you do? And EMS, how are you going to respond? And let's practice. In fact, there was a grocery store, I think it was Hebe, a Texas grocery store, HEB. They ran some type of tabletop simulation in January of 2020 for a pandemic, because they said, hey, there's rumors of this pandemic. Let's just play this out. And so here's what's going to happen. They figured out things like, wait, if this one person's not around, right, we can't unlock the door, we can't contact the suppliers. Let's make sure we have redundancy, because what if that person gets sick? And so they figured all this out and how we prepared for it. And they actually had this is going to sound terrible, a great pandemic, right? They were able to be very responsive. They met their customers' needs because they did that practice. And so I recommend, it's not something you can do as a small business and maybe 4 or 5 people where everything's really tight, but as your business grows, practice a few things. What happens if our website goes down? What happens if suddenly we lose our biggest client or something else happens? How do we respond? Because then it's like the fire alarm gets pulled and you say, I've done this before. I know to walk calmly and not panic.
Yeah, and servers and server space and server quality and server security for any business is so, so important. I'm going to pick on Amazon a little bit here, or praise Amazon. There's people who know that AWS is a thing, but they don't realize that AWS controls like 1/3 of the internet or something crazy, like all their hosting. That number could be way off. Fact check me. But, that's where they make the bulk of their money. So, but you see like a company like Facebook or Netflix. I think Amazon hosts Netflix. I could be wrong there too, but I think Facebook.
I believe they do.
Facebook has their own server environment.
Yes.
So for startups or any business, because AWS it's a great web service. And I think IBM's another one. There is a few more out there like Google and whatnot, but AWS is the big one. Now, do you advise certain types of companies to stick with AWS because they're reliable, or would you like, hey, as you grow, it might be smart to go towards your own server environment? What are the kind of challenges of going down that road?
Do not get your own server environment. I have managed teams where we've had hundreds of people. We've had large numbers of servers, probably more than most of your audience will. I don't say that out of ego or arrogance. I'm a tech guy working at tech companies. This is what we do. There's a reason I use Amazon or Microsoft's version Azure, or Google's Google Cloud Compute. Mm-hmm. They do things that I just don't want to deal with. Right? The fact that a hard drive fails somewhere, I remember 20 some years ago, I'd have servers, and if a hard drive failed, someone had to go out and replace the hard drive. And hopefully I had enough redundancy that if the hard drive failed, it wouldn't take things down. I never worry about a hard drive failing. I'm sure they do right now. Right now on my servers, a hard drive is failing, but I have no idea because Amazon has enough redundancy and Amazon has someone in that server room saying, oh, look, a failed hard drive, let me swap it out. And none of us know about it and none of us have to care about it. So absolutely use some type of cloud service, whether a big one, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, or one of the smaller ones like, was it DreamHost? There's one with drops. It's like an ocean, DigitalOcean, I think is a smaller one. I forget who the smaller ones are, but big ones, small ones. I couldn't tell you, who's best for your needs, but right. Use them. Don't reinvent the wheel.
No, that's a very good point. I mean, but then again, especially for like a media company, I'm going to use AWS Example again because I'm trying to convince you to convince me not to go to our own server environment, where we want to completely own everything we do. I mean, literally everything. We don't want to be at the whims of an AWS. And yeah, we use AWS right now to host our media for this. Like this podcast, this audio file is being hosted on an AWS server that's being built into our RSS feed. Obviously, because, if say it took off, and we got like this one podcast got 1 million, 2 million downloads, we couldn't afford to literally host the audio. Like that's just a big fat bill. When you own your own server environment, or say like we say something that Amazon doesn't like, Amazon can just cut that cord, like you saw with Rumble. I think it was Rumble, like whatever that right wing platform was that was being hosted in AWS. They just cut the cord. So it's like, yeah, like if we had APS want to do everything independent. Like we distribute our own feeds, we create our own content. Like we do everything that we own. We want to own literally everything. And a server, it's just like, it's like literally your backbone. Yes, it's more work, but if you're partnering with someone who knows what they're doing, you know, that's a big help. And it's just, but if you're not, yeah, I highly suggest AWS, at least when you're starting out. When you get too big, I think then's a good time to move over. Correct?
Let me ask you, are you planning to build your own microphones? Are you
one
planning
day
to write your own audio software?
Yes, one day, yes, 100%. Audio software, definitely, yes.
The reality is you have a certain competitive advantage. Your competitive advantage is not your microphone. No one's saying, ooh, I'm listening to this podcast because he has this amazing microphone no one else has, and that's why I listen to this podcast.
Right.
That's not your competitive advantage, right? So your competitive advantage is the great content you have. It's the fact that you can help people produce their own podcasts very quickly, efficiently, at low cost. That's your competitive advantage. The microphone doesn't really change that. The studio that you might record from, you might be recording from home, but if you rent a studio, a bad studio is going to ruin it, but a good studio isn't going to suddenly, alter that, right? The best you can do is the studio is just as good as others. So every business you ask, what's your competitive advantage? What's the thing you do that's better or unique or different than your competitors? And for most companies out there, the servers that you have, whether they're at Amazon or your own system or at Microsoft, that's not your competitive advantage. So what you want to do, use one of these cloud services. As you get bigger, if you really get that big, first you can negotiate with them. If you're starting to be spending tens of thousands of dollars a month, hundreds of thousands a month, they'll negotiate prices. They're quite happy to do that. You can also leave at any time. They don't keep your data and say, we're cutting you off, but we keep all your data. It's yours.
Right.
So you, of course, would keep local backups. And you can say, you know what, we're going to switch and go to Google or Microsoft or build our own. But here's the thing that's really hard to do on your own. It used to be I had to figure out my server capacity. Okay, I think we need 10 servers. I'm going to order 10 servers. And they're going to take a couple of weeks to show up. I have to set them up. And if I think I'm going to need 20 servers, I have to figure out when I'm going to need that, and I have to buy them. If I buy them too late, now I'm not serving the needs of my customers, right? My servers are too slow. If I buy them too early, I have a bunch of servers sitting around. I wasted money I don't need. With Amazon or any of these services, I can literally say, you know what? I need more capacity. And literally 3 minutes later, I've doubled the number of servers I have.
Yeah.
Maybe I just need it for a certain day and I turn it back off. If I want to build a test environment, I can literally create the same test environment, but turn it on just for a few hours, test it, turn it off. If I need the same test environment and I'm doing my own system, I buy 20 servers for production, 20 more that sit there only for testing that I otherwise don't use. So there's a lot of overhead and effort that you don't have to deal with when you go to the cloud.
Yeah, Amazon definitely saves you a lot of headaches. Like I got a friend who works with AWS specifically. Also, my cousin actually worked with AWS specifically, and it really is. It's a phenomenal product. I couldn't praise AWS enough. So we could probably go on and on and on about servers and tech, but there's some people going, okay, just move on already because it gets really nerdy and really geeky. So I want to talk more about startups and working with startups. What exactly do you do with startups? It says launching and developing new ventures at startups in Fortune 500s and in academia. So what exactly is it you do? Is it more on the tech side? Is it more of creative development? Like, elaborate.
It's a lot of different things. So
that's good.
My core is I help to define what the products are. This is what we need to build, whether it's we need more buttons, we need more features, or, well, we're serving this market segment, but here's a way we can serve a different market segment. Here's how we can expand our product offering. I oversee the construction and support of that with all the engineers, the data science piece. So product engineering and data science, that's my core. I'm usually the de facto HR person because at these startups, we don't have an HR person. I'm doing all the hiring. So I create our hiring processes. I'm hiring up for my teams. And then it usually just falls to me to do the things like culture building and the development of the company, like individual professional development. That usually all falls on me as well. At some companies, I help with the financial modeling. I help with fundraising. I've done a lot of marketing, so I've helped with the marketing piece. some companies, I'm the guy who flies out and says, we're going to open an office here. And so I'm running around looking for office space.
Right.
Involved with partnerships. I don't lead sales. That's the one area I try not to do. But very often for large software projects, they say, hey, this customer is interested in working with us, but there's a lot of integration. They have questions. So I have to go on the sales calls. And I spend a lot of time at conferences just speaking and promoting what we do. So it's a lot of different things all under the umbrella.
That's fascinating. That's nice to be a jack of all trades. Any startups you've worked with you want to give a shout out to?
Most of them people would not have heard of, so I'll just I won't waste people's time with
that's why you shout them out, man. It's okay. If you don't want to, that's fine too.
You can look at my LinkedIn profile and see what I've done, but it's fine.
Okay. All right. MIT. What exactly is the Undergraduate Practice Opportunities Program? The UPOP.
UPOP. That name doesn't carry a lot of meaning outside of MIT, and that's why we refer to it as the Career Success Accelerator. 20 some years ago, the companies we work with, meaning the companies who recruit MIT students, said, listen, your students, they're great. They're obviously very smart people, but there are skills we can't find. Leadership, negotiations, communication, teamwork. These are the skills we want in people we hire, but we can't find it. Not just in your students, not just in college students, just anywhere. We can't find people with these skills and we really want them. And there's been similar research done at other universities. This is a universal problem. Schools don't teach these skills. We wanted to address this and created that program where we said, we have to get this into our students' education. So we started the program. It's very hands-on and interactive. It's not just people like me lecturing at them, right, but we do role-playing activities to help develop those skills.
Okay. Very nice. Yeah, MIT. I wish I could have got the MIT, but, you know, I liked Hofstra. Hofstra was fun. I like podcasting.
I have an ex-girlfriend and a cousin who are both Hofstra alums.
All right. Shout out to your cousin. So many degrees. So I'm going to read them off again. So you got a Bachelor's of Science in Physics, which I had trouble passing in high school. Electrical Engineering, which, screw that. Computer Science. I like computers, but not so much science. As well as a Master's in Electrical Engineering. Took a step up. And Computer Science, a step up. Focusing on cryptography. Why so many degrees, man? That's a lot of degrees. That's a lot of things to hang on your wall. What made you want to go through all of that schooling?
I liked them all. I didn't want to limit myself to just one area. In fact, I think of myself as actually being lazy because I probably, if I had pushed myself, gotten a couple other degrees, but I just settled for that.
Hey, man, you're still young. You can go back. Now, how long did it take you to get all of them? Did you do them over? It's like, what'd you go to? So a Bachelor's of Science was undergrad. Obviously, that's what a bachelor's is.
Yeah. So all of this at MIT, and so 4 years undergrad and 2 years for the master's.
You did all this in 6 years?
Yeah.
Oh, good God. How'd you, okay. How did you have the discipline to do that in your early 20s? Because I remember my early 20s. I'm in my mid-20s now. I'm disciplined at 26. I keep myself on a hard line, but man, I'm not disciplined to get like 5 degrees in 6 years. I couldn't. How?
It was just, I'm interested in these subjects, so I want to take the classes. I want to learn. And as you take more classes, you get more degrees.
So how has each helped you?
The electrical engineering, computer science gave me the right fundamentals for what I do now. As a CTO, I have to understand how software works. And the cryptography in my graduate degree, that of course applied to my work in cryptography, in
right,
cybersecurity, in that area. Now, physics, on the one hand, I don't do a lot of physics problems per se, but really physics teaches you how to think about and analyze problems. And there's just no better education I had than my physics degree in terms of problem solving. So I'm really grateful. I don't really solve a lot of quantum mechanical equations these days, but the skills I use to do that help me every day.
Physics was hard. It was very hard in high school. I took my junior year, but it was so fascinating. It's like I'm having trouble understanding exactly what's going on here, but I'm so fascinated. And I kid you not, my professor's name was Mr. Newton. You can't make that up, and we all called him Fig. He was just like the jolliest, greatest teacher I could ever have had. So shout out to Mr. Fig. But all those degrees, man, MIT, Massachusetts, Boston's the 3rd most expensive city in the country. How much debt did that put you in? And are you still is it all paid off by now? Did it all pay off?
It's all paid off. I was very fortunate that my parents were helping me to do it. And then, of course, when you come out with a pure science degree, it's a lucrative field. So you start earning pretty well even out of school, and that's just grown since there.
Yeah, like I mean, like I have a bachelor's in journalism. Like technically what I do now is journalism. I guess podcasting is a form of journalism, form of storytelling. But, you know, I work my job thinking I didn't really learn any of this in college. Like, I love that I went to college. I do not regret going to college. But there's some things in this world that I truly believe you do not need to go to college for. Journalism's borderline for me, depending where you're going, what you learn. But everything you went for, yeah, you need college for each and every single one of those things. Now, what's your take on the college degree and the current state of the country being everyone needs to go to college?
Yeah, absolutely not. I think we overemphasize college.
Agreed.
In too many cases. Now, that said, I'd like to see more people go to college, right? So that sounds conflicting. What do I mean by this? There are some things that you get in a college education, which honestly, it should be at the high school level, but we've watered that down so much. Mm-hmm. There are basic skills we need. If you can't do math, if you don't understand concepts like compound interest, well, then how can you possibly be an informed voter? How can you understand, as we talk about economic policy and tax policy, is this going to pay off in the long run, or is this adding to debt without the benefits? If you can't do that math, it's hard to be an active participant in our society.
Yeah.
Understanding history, understanding the patterns of history and what we're going through and what we can learn to not repeat mistakes. Those are things you get at the college level. I'd like to see more of that happen. But where I think we go wrong, we'd say to too many people, you need to go to college. This is how you get into middle class. This is how you stay there. And we get there's a classic, the philosophy degree, where you wind up working at McDonald's because who hires philosophy majors? We have creative writing. We see a lot of that. And it's a wonderful skill, just like philosophy, but there's just not a lot of demand for it. Or the other thing I see happening, people who got a 4-year college degree, they went to a very expensive college, and then they wound up managing a local retail store. And having an English lit degree does not help you manage a local retail store. Instead, I would like to see more of what we refer to as vocational training, which we normally think of as, oh, that's carpentry or plumbing or air conditioning repair. But I'd like to see vocational degrees for running a retail store. We're going to teach you a little human resources, a little marketing, a little bit of inventory management, a little bit of accounting. These are the practical skills to do that job. Forget the Shakespeare, forget the foreign language. Let's just focus you on this. And I think that can be more cost effective.
Yeah.
I'll note, by the way, you said computer science. Most software engineers, I don't think you need to go to college if you want to get a software engineering job. You can do so with vocational training. What we have today out there is usually garbage, but as those improve, you can skip college and learn to be a programmer and get a job.
Like the best teacher you can have is life experience. You know, luckily, my second job, a job I currently have outside of APS, you know, I do live streaming. I do live streaming on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and sometimes LinkedIn. But, you know, there was a learning curve. I never went into a professional broadcast studio to work in. Never learned that. Now, they hired me, rolled the dice on me, and trained me. Turns out I'm really good at it. It's really fun. But, you know, I didn't go to college for that. But a college degree was a requirement for that. Now, I'm sitting here at my job, again, love it, it's a great job, saying, you know, they could have hired me out of high school super cheap and just trained me on how to use this stuff and work your way up the ladder. Now, everything you just said is very relevant in terms of problems with education and the schooling system, but I'm going to turn that back on the businesses as well, because you are requiring a job that for a bachelor's in whatever, a bachelor's degree in whatever. So, like, I would advise businesses, like, listen, don't make that a requirement. For like APS, if you know how to edit video and I can pay you, you're hired. I don't care if you went to college. What kind of content can you make? If you can sell stuff, you can sell my product. I don't care if you went to college. How much money can you make? Now, if you're going to be a doctor, yeah, I need to see a degree and some studies. But like, turn that on the business, because it's a problem with the businesses and the institutions as well, where they're requiring people to go to college as much as the college is making people required to go there.
This is economics 101, supply and demand.
Yeah.
When we had a hirer's market, they could be picky. They could say, we have so many applicants. Let's just set that bar. You have to have a college degree, and that's just going to weed out. And it's not that people who don't have a degree can't do it. In some cases, you're more likely to find someone capable with the degree. But to your point, I agree. A lot of jobs, you don't actually need that college degree. Thankfully, with what we're going through now, where it's a labor-friendly market, right, where there's a lot more demand for labor than availability, I think we're going to see businesses are looking, how can we get more flexible, and dropping that college degree requirement is going to be a lot more common going forward.
Yeah. Education's very, very important. Don't get me wrong. Like, if you want to go to college, go to college. Just please don't make it a dance major, because you're wasting, because a dance major a degree costs the exact same as a medical degree, undergrad at least. And that in and of itself is an issue. And there's a lot of colleges that, I could have done my journalism program in 2 years. A lot of people could have done their journalism program in 2 years, but I had to do 4 because the school required prerequisite classes. I had to take math. I had to take, a lit class. I had to take a language class. Now, if you just took those out and I just went for my major, I could have college done in 2 years, save myself the debt, and still have all the fun.
Yeah, we'll see if we start to get to variable pricing for majors. I know that's been tried at a few schools. Then you get some interesting questions such as, well, we can charge more for the engineering classes because they can afford to take on more debt. Mm-hmm. And therefore, it's fine. They can go into debt, they'll pay it off. Unlike, for example, someone who's a dance major. On the other hand, we in society definitely need more engineers. We don't necessarily need more dance majors. And by the way, I was a competitive ballroom dancer for years. I am a huge dance fan. I support the arts.
Of course.
But should we want to encourage people towards engineering and away from dance, well, then arguably we should do the opposite. We should make it cheaper to get the engineering degree and more expensive to get that dance degree.
Ooh.
So you could argue either way.
It's an Uno reverse card right there. I didn't see that one coming. Because to me, it makes sense. If you're going to be a degree that's going to pay off, like a brain surgeon, something that's very hard to get, if it's going to pay off, yeah, it should cost more. Like, dance, well, let's pick on dance a little bit more, or music, right? Like, if you have a school with a very, very good dance program, you go to college to make contacts and network, to make connections, because they're going to get you to jobs that pay well. That's true. That's true. I've heard that from a lot of dance majors. I'm here to network, really, for 4 years. That's what the debt gets me. It's like, yes, yeah, you know what? That's a very fair point. But you have to be the best of the best. And, it's the same thing with acting, same thing with film. Only the best of the best make it. A lot of people don't make it. And you're burying yourself in a hole.
This is what I talk about a lot in chapter 1 of the career toolkit on the career planning chapter. We have to recognize that there's different types of careers that have different paths and different outcomes. Mm-hmm. So let's consider a few different ones. If you get a marketing degree and you have a career in marketing, so you start out, you're right out of school, you get a little bit of money. And as you advance, you make more money. You become more senior, you make more money. That's a pretty linear path. Now let's look at a doctor. If you're a doctor, you're going way into debt. You have college debt, then you have medical school debt. Mm-hmm. As a resident, you're not making money. And so you've got residency, you mm-hmm. might then specialize. And so if, let's say you're a brain surgeon, you're going into significant debt, you're making no money until probably about age 35.
Yeah, that's true.
But then what happens at age 35? All of a sudden, you start out probably making about $600,000-$700,000, and it goes up from there. So in that case, you have delayed compensation. And so there's very high compensation on the back end to make up for you've got very little on the front end. The other path would be dancers and actors, where you say, you look at the payout distribution, and it's a power law. There's a handful of people who make a lot of money, right? Go to Hollywood, there's a handful of actors who are doing great, wonderful careers. And then you go down to a few people who are getting by, and then a lot of people who get nowhere. And so if you go into one of those fields, you have to recognize there's a distribution of outcomes, and the just raw probability says you're going to be on the tail end of that unless you get lucky and or have talent. And so we have to recognize within our own career, what is the distribution we're looking at? What's that payout? And are we comfortable doing that?
No, that's very well said. That's very well said. It really is a pick your path. But you know what, Mark? This is America, all right? This is the most innovative country in the world. It'll all work itself out as long as the government doesn't get too much in the way. Or as long as, you know, the big institutions we have don't get too far in the way. Because people love to get in each other's way in this country. But it's America. It'll pull through. Innovation lives and breathes here. And like you said, with the workers' revolution that's happening in America right now, it's a good thing. It's a good thing. Like all these strikes going around the country right now, it's a good thing. Workers have power again. And that gives me hope.
Yeah, I'm also long-term bullish on America, our innovation, and the labor market, even if any given period we might have some volatility and setbacks.
Or inflation, you know, hopefully, you know, I don't want to get into inflation. I don't want to talk about the economy. Let's talk about some podcasting. So everything we have just talked over the past about 30 American minutes, podcasting never came up. So how did you get into podcasting? Even though you don't have one of your own, you've been a guest on 200 plus podcasts. So out of your magnificent career and all of your accomplishments, how did you get into podcasting?
When you have a book out, the way to promote it, because no one goes on tours, no one goes city to city and let me do book signings. That's barely done normally, and certainly during a pandemic, that was not happening at all. The way to promote a book is to go on podcasts. And my friend Dory Clark, when I went to her for advice as I was writing the book, she said, you need to get yourself on lots of podcasts. I said, all right, that's the goal. That's what I'm going to do.
Yeah, that's a great piece of advice.
Yeah, anyone who has a book or a record, if you're an artist or something new, you want to get the word out, podcasts are the best way to do it because you're hitting a targeted market with a relevant message.
Mm-hmm. So what's been the biggest benefit of being a guest on multiple people's podcasts? You know, it can be financially for your book, but it could also be plenty of other reasons. Like what do you get out of being a podcast other than selling your book?
Yeah, obviously selling the book gets out there and builds my name and brand. I have met some fantastic people. The people who do podcasts are usually the more interesting people. They have the podcast for a reason. Mm-hmm. They're interested in the topic. They're excited and engaged in that topic. And you get to meet these people. So whatever you do, whatever your field is, when you talk to podcasters in the field, you're going to meet some great people in your field. You're going to expand your network. You're going to create friendships. You're going to meet really interesting, fascinating people.
So I got to ask you, man, why not start your own podcast?
All right. Great question. We're going to reverse it to start because there's always, when you say, why not do something, you need a reason to do something in the affirmative.
Okay.
So now as someone who gets people to get their podcast off the ground, please pitch me, right? Here's why you should do a podcast. And then I'll talk about why I don't think those reasons necessarily apply, or I will say, sign me up and let's do a podcast.
I mean, a podcast is a voice for your brand or business. A podcast is a personal expression. So let's start the question. What is a podcast? A podcast is a personally oriented discussion centered around select topics, right? That's Will Tarashuk original. You can take it. So the idea is, what are you doing? What are you talking about? It can talk about anything. And the big example I love to go to is Conrad Thompson. Now, if you don't know who Conrad Thompson is, he's the fat guy from Alabama who sells home mortgages. Why do I bring up Conrad Thompson? Because he is also one of the biggest wrestling podcasters in the world today. He's got 5 of them. And let me tell you how much money he's made selling mortgages on a wrestling podcast. A lot. And let me tell you, he also married Ric Flair's daughter. So he has even more on top of that. But he was doing fine before all of that. So if you're doing a podcast on what's something that interests you, just general.
Me personally.
You personally.
The topics of my book, professional development.
Okay. So let's say, do a solo show on this, whatever you would give away for free. That's a podcast. Like if I'm talking to someone who does sales, right? They're selling life insurance and they want to have a meeting with me. What would you tell that person for free? That's a podcast. Like a free consultation meeting for a business owner, that's a podcast. If you're doing realty and you're selling houses, that's a podcast. You know, here is the neighborhood. Here's some stats in the neighborhood. Here's some crime rates in the neighborhood. Here's the school districts in the neighborhood. Here's how they rank compared to other neighborhoods. Here's the price of the house. You know, that stuff you would give away for free. That's a podcast. You know, as soon as the house is off the market, you put a little note in the end of the podcast, like a solo episode. This house is off the market. You know, check out my other stuff. Right? So it is a tool. A podcast is a tool to sell whatever it is you have to offer. Or it's just a means to have fun. Like you're very easy to talk to. We can kind of delve off by, no, you're going to bring it right back to where I need you to go. You can almost say exactly what I'm going to say before I say it. I've only known you for 45 minutes. So a podcast can bring great value to you because 1, you have something to say, 2, you're interesting, and 3, you have something to sell. Why not have a podcast?
And remind me, what do I have to sell?
Well, you got your book. And you also got, you know, you have this story of working with startups. So you could even target startups like, hey, I'm a startup. You could invite me on your podcast and go, okay, you're a startup. Tell me about your business. What are you looking for? You know, and you can pitch some ideas like on the podcast. And after the podcast, you go, hey, man, you know, check out my website. Here's what I have to offer. You know, fill this out and maybe you can work together. If you can, great. If you don't, thanks for the content. It's been great talking to you. Right? You know, you have plenty of things to offer people.
So you hit the nail on the head. And I think the advice is great for anyone out there listening saying, hey, there's something I sell, a product or a service, and I want to reach a large customer base by selling this. Podcast is something you should consider. The reason I don't is I don't have as much to sell as most people in my position do. So someone like me normally says, well, I have a book, and then I'm going to consult. I'm going to be a consultant and offer this service. Now, the secret to publishing is that no one makes money on books. When you do the math, like Stephen King, J.K. Rowling, sure. But most of us, we're not making money from books. The way you make money when you have a book, particularly a business book like mine, is either you make money consulting based on the book or speaking. So I only have one thing to sell, the book. I do not actually consult on the topic in my book. It's not a lot of people, oh, I'll be an HR consultant. I'll help your company figure it out. That's not what I do. In fact, I give away a lot of free content on my website, how your company can do it yourself. You don't need me. You don't need to hire me. Go do it yourself for free. So I don't have that to sell. What I basically do is either full-time as a CTO at a startup company. So there's usually one other than right now, we're doing the fractional work because I've been promoting the book. I'm with one company full-time, so I'm not selling my time. Or I do the speaking engagements. So now where the podcast would make sense, if I said, hey, hire me as a consultant and get to know me. Because then if you want to hire me, if you want to pay me thousands of dollars as a consultant, you have to build up that trust. How do I know I can trust Mark? Convincing you to spend $20-some on a book, okay, that's not too hard. You listen to me for a bit and you say, yeah, you know, I'll invest $20. He seems like he knows what he's talking about. Mm-hmm. So for selling the book, going on other podcasts where I hit different audiences gets me that wide network. If I have my own, they say, okay, this Mark guy, he's interesting. Let me come back. Let me listen to him. Okay, he's interesting. I'll give him the $20 for the book. But then there's nothing more for me to sell them because they're not hiring me as a CTO.
Right.
And the speaking, now I do get hired as a speaker. That's typically done by executives or HR or conference organizers. But that's a very tiny targeted community. Most people out there listening to podcasts are not in a position to go spend 5 figures to hire someone like me to go speak at the event. So podcasting is probably not the most effective way to do that. So that's why I don't have a podcast. I think you're right that most people, when you have a service, so if you are a consultant, if you have a small business, that podcast is going to be a great way to build your brand, market your business. I recommend it. If you're mostly an employee, even an executive in my case, it may not be as appropriate for your business. You might do it because it's fun. Mm-hmm. You might do it for your personal brand. And you could argue maybe if I'm a CTO, I should be doing a tech podcast and get known as this brilliant tech expert. So people always want to hire me as a CTO. But I'm less excited to talk about that on a podcast.
Yeah. Okay, let me ask you this then. Do you have an audience?
A little bit. I just started producing content fairly recently. I started blogging just because I said, yeah, I got to start putting out regular content. I have my social media posts. I'll post every time I do a podcast. I'll post now with the blog content I have. So I'll post about things going on.
Yeah.
But I started producing regular content as the blog. And I do recognize I could just read my blog and that becomes a podcast episode.
I tell people all the time, literally anything can be a podcast because the P stands for personal. It's whatever you want it to be. But I ask you if you have an audience because, if you already have an audience, then, people are going to listen to it. That attracts advertisers, right? That's another thing. A podcast can be another source of income for yourself. However, if you answer the question very little, you know what, man? I think you're 100% right. In terms of you as a person, as a brand, and as a professional, you don't see the ROI in it. And as someone who would love to work with you and would love to have you on APS, I don't see the ROI for you in it either. So I'm telling you honestly, I think you're making the right decision in not starting a podcast. However, if that audience starts to grow, keep it available. Because then if you have an audience, then it's not what are you selling. It's what can others sell them.
Right. And I agree completely. If I build an audience and I have some way that I'm interested in monetizing, and we use this broadly, I don't mean to think of the audience. No podcasters like, oh, look, there's little cash cows, right? But I have an audience.
It's a plus.
What things of value can I provide to the audience and how can that create revenue for me to continue to do the podcast?
Yeah.
Then yes, it makes sense. And it might be true that in the future, as I build up my name, because, well, granted, there are tens of thousands of people who know who I am prior to the book, because I would speak at conferences, I've been teaching at universities. Lots of people knew who I was. I wasn't adding them as followers. I wasn't getting people to follow me around.
Right.
So now I'm, for the first time as an author, building that audience, that direct audience says, I am paying attention to what Mark's doing. And
it is a double-edged sword. Where, a podcast is a great way to also build an audience. But man, you know what? That's a very good answer. You've probably answered that question a lot and you were prepared. And I tip my hat to you for why you don't have a podcast. So you also talk about the do's and don'ts of being a guest, which I think we're going to have some different philosophies on, which is a lot of fun. But, I've seen a lot of, the do's and don'ts of being a host. You threw another Uno reverse card in there. Not so much advice on how to be a good guest. So how did this come about? Where, I got to teach people how to be a proper guest.
And by the way, I'm happy to throw in some tips as well of mistakes I have seen, my big pet peeves of podcast hosts. But to be a good guest, if you want to be a guest on someone else's podcast, and by the way, if you're going to be a podcast host, a great way to grow your audience is to go on other podcasts, right? You have each other on your shows. Yeah. So you're going to be a guest as well. If you're going to be a guest, step one, remember your job is to make sure you're delivering value to the audience. It's not there to sell things, right? We briefly mentioned my book, but you haven't heard me say, buy the book, buy the book, buy the book. I am here to make this interesting and valuable to the audience. And if you want to buy my book, great. If you don't, that's okay.
Yep.
So first, focus on the audience and value. Pay attention to the audience. So many people, I hear this from lots of podcast hosts, they say, I just get spam from someone saying, I have a show for HR executives and someone wants to talk about knitting, right? That has no bearing. They're not paying attention. Who is the audience and what's the value to the audience? So when you reach out, know who the audience is, do your research. And then when you pitch, you say, this is who I am. Here's my credibility. Here is why I think this will be valuable to your audience. And anything you can do to provide some proof. Now, you can also make things easier. I sent you a full media kit and interview kit.
Yes, and let me touch upon that for a second, because media kits, that's a big one. That is a big one, because whenever I put out in a Facebook group like, hey, I'm looking for guests, the main thing I ask is just give me as much information on who you are and your podcast as possible. Like, something that's linked to your TikTok. I might look at it, I might not. But, the more information you can provide, the better. You know, you sent me a link to an article you have featured. You sent me to other podcasts you've been on, your website, and like your LinkedIn or whatever. Perfect. Because I can take like an hour, maybe a little more depending on the person, going through that information, and I literally form the podcast in my head and write it down on a spreadsheet. That's my process. So a media kit, so important. So important.
Whenever you sell, so any salesman will tell you, you want to make the job as easy as possible for the customer to say yes. Questions they have, answer before they ask them. Concerns, address them before they're raised. You want to just open that path so all they can do is say yes. When you go on as a guest, I am selling myself to be on your show. Mm-hmm. Please put me on the show, and here is why. So if I just say, look, I'm a really interesting guy, have me on your show, if that was my email, I have to say, all right, well, why is Mark interesting? Now I got to go Google him. Now I got to look up his profile. Now I have to see, does he sound competent when I have him on the show? Will he freeze up on camera? What are we going to talk about? And I'm asking you to do all the work. A good salesperson says, I'm going to make it as easy as possible. I'm going to do the work for you. And that's what the media kit does. It says, here's answers to all your questions, or at least as many as I can think of. And you can look at all of it, some of it, part of it, whatever is relevant to you to make your job easier. And so a good guest provides all these resources, and that can be background and links, images. I have zip files of images. When someone says, most people say, I just want a headshot, here you go. And that's in the media kit. Mm-hmm. They said, you have more images? Here you go. Here's a full zip file. Take whatever you want, right? I'm not going to make you kind of go and ask for each one. I just make it as easy as possible for the buyer, the podcast host.
Well, and it's another thing that that I do, that we do it on part of our process, that we kind of force your hand a little bit. Like when you are a guest on this podcast, I send you a link, hey, just fill out this form. It'll give me all the information I need. So it was all there, including a headshot. You know, for the Ambiguous podcast solution, I asked for a podcast logo because I use that logo in our graphics package. You know, I put a little watermark of your logo in the bottom third. So it's like, you know, I'm asking for things to help me help you as well. And, you know, that's a great tool. The forms we do, so lifesaver. Because it's like, okay, you want to make it easier for me. At the same time, as a podcast host, I have to make it easier for you.
And so many podcasts have that. I know I've got my copy paste answers because the questions are 90% the same from one podcast to next.
It's basic information.
So I can just copy paste. I might do a little editing for this particular show versus the other. I might change my bio, or I might say, here's the key angles to hit.
Yep.
But yeah, you can prepare and just make life easier for yourself, for the podcaster, for the guest. It's processes make life easier.
You also say finding the appropriate podcasts, to which I go, every podcast is an appropriate podcast. Like, you mentioned knitting earlier. You know, I don't know anything about knitting. Not a thing. But if someone invited me on their knitting podcast, I'd probably ask some questions about knitting. So you say, don't just spray a message to anyone who will listen. Putting out careless messages by the dozen trying to land a spot will only damage your professional profile, not help it. So when you say careless messages by the dozens, do you mean your pitch to podcasters or you being a guest on the podcast?
As a guest, I go on a lot of broad podcasts. I go on podcasts for entrepreneurs, for workers, for HR, for exec. I go on leadership podcasts. I've been on education podcasts. I've been on podcasts about podcasting. I've been on book podcasts. But even then, when I go on book podcasts, I'm very careful. I don't just say, hey, I have my book. And for some, they'll just say, oh, we like authors. Great, I'm an author. Here's my book. Mm-hmm. I've gone on library podcasts. Now, if I just said, I'm an author, put me on, they say, we don't do that. This is a podcast by librarians for librarians. And we'd be spammed with authors if you just want to talk about your book. I said, okay, for what you do, I have something of interest. I have an app that goes with my book. There's a free app. Said, let's talk about why I built that app, why I think more books will need an app, and what this means for the future of media. That's relevant to librarians. But if you just say, well, I want to talk about my book, and I'll talk about it to anyone. I'll go on a knitting podcast and talk about my book. Well, the people listening to that knitting podcast want to talk about knitting. They don't want to talk about career skills. That's not why they tune in. And I'm wasting the time of the host by just spamming them, hoping to get on.
Well, okay, with the approach, the initial email, it's really funny because we actually do have a knitting podcast on APS, the Darn It podcast. It's hilarious. Shout out to Lily from the Darn It podcast. So I love that you mentioned knitting. But But like in terms of, cold calling, reaching out to someone, yeah, don't just spray it out, because I think it does damage your profile. No one likes being DM'd your pitch. No one likes reading a pitch in a DM, myself included. I hate giving them more than I hate receiving them. Because if I receive them, it's like, I can just ignore it. But giving it, it's just like, I know it's not going to work because I'm not good at it. Some people are really great at it. But I hate it as a process. But very simply, my philosophy when it comes to podcasting is that everything needs to be everywhere, always. Which pretty much boils down to, you need to be in as many places as possible, as often as possible. So, like, if someone was like, hey, come on my podcast, unless I'm physically too busy, I'm on that podcast because I need to be everywhere, especially as a founder of a company. Like, I'll go on that knitting podcast and like talk about how my grandmother knits and how she made me a bunch of blankets growing up. I still up to this day, she still has my brother's baby blanket that she knitted herself. He still has in his apartment with his fiance. Like, I'll find an angle. That's my responsibility. I'll find an angle.
There's a subtle difference. If Darn It wants to bring me on and say, please come talk to us, if you think I will add value, I agree with you. Go wherever you can and spread the value. But I would not be so arrogant to say, let me shove my message onto your audience, which at first pass probably isn't a fit. If you see it and want to reach out to me, give me a call. But I'm not going to just spam every podcast I can find to shove my message down it. Because to your point, podcasters, especially as you become more successful, you get spam every day. Yeah. I get plenty of spam as an executive. We all hate it. So do a little bit of research, say, here's why it's relevant. And if you can't come up with a reason why it's relevant, don't reach out to that person. It's okay if it's a stretch, right? Yeah. If you're a dancer and say, hey, let's talk about knitting and dance outfits, like, all right, a little bit of a stretch, but pitch it. Maybe it works, maybe not.
Yeah.
But don't just shove your message anywhere you can find it.
I would definitely say find an angle. Find an angle. That's very helpful because, for this podcast example, talking with Tarashuk, I keep it broad. I keep it vague on purpose. Like your email, I went and go, ooh. I saw I was a guest on 200 podcasts. I immediately go, ooh. When I go, ooh, you're coming on the podcast. If someone reaches out to me, I kind of go, I'll leave it be because I'm not invested. But like I keep it broad on purpose because this Talking with Tarashuk podcast, hopefully, as I grow, I can talk to scientists, world leaders, wannabe politicians, current politicians, comedians, actors, dancers, knitters, teachers, waste management people. Keep it as in many different places as possible as long as I find them interesting, because now someone's going to go, well, that's a lot for one audience to handle. It's like, well, yes, but there's another philosophy I have, which is called recycle your content. So if I do 40 podcasts over the next year or so with life coaches, I can take those life coaches and I can go talking life with Tarashuk, talking business with Tarashuk, talking baseball with Tarashuk, and I can release those specific episodes on a completely new RSS feed, and it becomes a playlist that I can then distribute out to all those different people, all those different platforms. So someone just goes, you know what, Will? I love when you talk to comedians, but, there's too many UFC fighters in here, man. Too much UFC. I need more baseball. Guess what, Greg? They're all right here. There's some fantasy baseball. There's some players. There's some managers. There's some scouts. There's some writers. It's all there for you. All the baseball your little heart can handle. But it starts at the top. We're talking with Tarashuk. They can find it all in one place. And it's broad. It's there. It's all right there. Like that's just. So he's like, no, spray a message everywhere because you never know where it's going to be used elsewhere.
Yes, I do agree. Anyone with content, try to get wide as long as you're respecting the keeper of the audience you're reaching out to.
Definitely. All right, networking. Network is a big one. So how important of a networking tool is podcasting?
Podcasting, I think, can be great for networking because, again, you're going to meet someone interesting. The people who screw up networking, I always talk about this in my networking talks. It's the people, you go to some conference, walk up, hi, my name is Mark, what's your name? Okay, give me your card, here's my card, exchange cards, great, done. Okay, it's like this drive-by networking.
Yeah.
Okay, we exchange cards, I know nothing about you. But here, you and I, we've got an hour-long conversation. The time we spent before, we'll probably spend some time after. That's already a great start. That's more than I talk to some people at conferences.
Yeah.
And then we might even follow up. Sometimes we've got another conversation later, like let's just catch up, or hey, just want to resync. Here's how the show is doing. I will always, now here's something I do at the end of every podcast, and we're going to do at the end of this one. There's 2 questions I ask. So after we go off the air, what I would be asking is, thanks, I had a good time. We'll wrap up the show. We'll talk about how it went. And I always ask, first, are there any other guests who you might be looking for? Because I know a lot of fascinating people. I know other authors, professors, entrepreneurs, lots of podcasters. I know all sorts of people with content. Now, you're a pretty broad content platform. Others might say, oh, we're just about HR people, or we're just about leadership development. Okay, well, I know a few people who specialize in that area. And what I've done, because they still get pitches every day, but if they think, Mark, he was a pretty good guest. So if he's recommending this person's at least worth talking to, right? She's probably going to be pretty competent as well. And so I help people I know get on podcasts. I help podcasters I know get good guests. And so I'm just helping lots of people out. Then the second question, I take it and flip it. Say, by the way, do you know any other podcasts for whom I might be a good guest? Because podcasters know other podcasters, right? It's a community, get to know the other people. And as you know, finding guests can be easy. Finding good guests, not so much. So if they like me on the podcast, they're happy to refer me to someone else. And so it's very easy. If you have your own podcast, ask these 2 questions at the end to every guest. If you're a guest, ask another podcaster. And it's a great way to expand your network and meet more people. And we all help each other.
Definitely. And I'll have answers for both of those questions, so don't you worry. What's the wrong way to network on a podcast? Because sometimes it's still a feeling out process for me sometimes. I'm still kind of figuring out the right way and the wrong way to do things. It's a guess and check game, especially being a young startup. What are some of the wrong ways to network on a podcast?
Well, the wrong ways to network in general would be like the example I gave earlier, where someone says, oh, we met for 5 minutes, we exchanged cards. Great, we're networked. I always say, the people say, oh, look, I add this person on LinkedIn. I have all these people I'm connected to on LinkedIn. Just because you connected to someone on LinkedIn doesn't mean you're networked. It's like saying, look, I swiped right on Tinder. She swiped right too. We're engaged.
That's it.
Right? That's it. We both swiped right. Done.
Right.
No one would say, well, we swiped right, therefore we're in a relationship. But we do that on LinkedIn. Or we do it with, I exchange cards. I've networked. Now, we know on Tinder, when you both swipe right, okay, that's the start of it. That's where you say, okay, we've expressed some interest, but now we actually have to build the relationship, which we call dating. Professionally, the fact that we connected on LinkedIn, or we exchanged cards, or we had an initial conversation, that's the start of it. The relationship has to be built over time. And so even with podcasting, there are podcasters, okay, we had a good show, and then I'll keep in touch with them. And we might email each other, every few months. How are you doing? What's going on? I've got a call actually later this week with a podcaster who I met over the summer. We're just catching up and seeing how we're doing. And so it's building that relationship. Relationships take time. So recognize, for any relationship, whether it comes from a podcast or anything else, it involves a commitment of time to build the relationship.
Definitely. No, 100%. And, there's going to be certain people, like next year, after like some time pass, I'm going to be jumping like, hey, do you want to come back? You want to be on again? And it'll be Mark Herschberg 2 will be the title, right? And, eventually, 10 years from now, it'll be like Mark Herschberg 14 or whatever. I'll keep a tally of guests I have coming back. Because that's another thing with podcasts. Like Rogan's podcast, I look forward to when he brings back Joey Diaz on. I look forward when he brings on Jocko Willink. Or I look forward to when he brings back on, X, Y, or Z. Because I know they're going to be great shows. Because I found them, and then I now know this person because of that podcast. So me personally, like, oh, Mark's coming back on? Hell yeah, I'm there day one. Right? Like that's part of a podcast. So you also,
by the way, something you can do as a podcaster. So this is a great thing for any podcasters listening to this. When you have a podcast, let's say on knitting, most of your guests have something to do with knitting.
Right.
They all have some interest in knitting. Well, they'd probably be really interested in meeting each other, meeting other knitters. I know a few podcasters who have a quarterly event and just say, we're going to do a Zoom call and we're going to get on either everyone we have this quarter or just anyone who's ever been on. We have this open call, and it's not everyone, it's a handful of people get on, but everyone on that call has a common interest and get to meet other people with that interest. Mm-hmm. So if you're a podcaster, you can introduce your guests to each other and they love it, and they will love you for doing that.
Mm-hmm. No, 100%. Definitely. I mean, networking, like I said, broadcasting is a networking tool. And it's just like, it can go far beyond just the hour, 45-minute conversation or whatever you have on that day. We also talk about, clear talking points. Yes. Now, I got to ask for clarification. By talking points, do you mean like know what you're going to say? Because I hear talking points. I think traditional TV, radio, like, go for the soundbite. And like you say, focus on sound bites. And to me, I'm just like, don't focus on sound bites. Focus on sound bites after. Go back to it after and find the sound bites. When you're talking, focus on the conversation. You say pay for media training. Is there a difference in training for podcasts rather than traditional media like TV or radio, in your opinion?
So let's look at both of those points, which are related. So the first, I agree, don't worry about sound bites. And what's great about a podcast, it's okay if you get into a 90-second, a 2-minute answer, 2.5 minutes, if it's a really interesting point, as opposed to TV where even 30 seconds is a little long for TV now. I have to answer that in 15 seconds. And for something complex, I can't do it in 15 seconds.
I don't want you to do it in 15 seconds. I want you to explain cybersecurity to me. That's why I asked it. You know what I mean? Like, don't go for sound bites. I'll find the sound bites afterwards. Don't you worry. I got a lot here.
The talking points is more for shows like this one. This is just an open conversation, free flowing in topics. But there's a lot of them who say, we're an executive leadership podcast, and we want everyone to walk away with 3 takeaways. So what are your 3 takeaways? I've seen a lot of shows where they ask the guest, what are your key points? And if you don't have it, I'm not saying that's your soundbite, but the key point might be learn leadership from day one, encourage others to lead, and leading is an interactive experience. Maybe those are your 3 points. So, okay, that's the theme of the show. That's where they're going. Because some people like it very structured. This show, we're free flowing, right? We didn't know what we were going to talk about, and we're talking about this and that, and that's fine too, but there are different styles. If you have talking points and you have training and you're okay, what do you want to talk about? You want to talk more about knitting? No problem. Dance, I'm good with that. Right. AWS and cloud, hey, whatever. For others, they need to know where you're going and you need to know where they're going. So be prepared for it, but don't stick to it. To your second point, media training, that is just for people who are inexperienced, the people who really don't know how to speak, and it's it's painful to just listen to them. So if you're not used to speaking, if you get nervous, this is a conversation. This isn't necessarily public speaking, but some people feel, oh, I'm on stage. If you're not comfortable with that, getting some of that training, whether it's to eliminate things like ums, or whether it's just to have those clear, coherent points and not to ramble, because some people need help with that.
Some people do need it. Yeah, there's some people where it's like, okay, cut the answer short. And as a host, I try to find my way in and kind of sneak myself back in there. But some people, man, I just wind them up and let them go. It all depends. And I don't know until we hit record which way it's going to turn most of the time. That's very good. That's a very good point. When it comes to the ums and uhs, I'll get this where it's just like, can you cut out the ums and uhs, like all of them? And I go, no, because people speak very naturally with ums and uhs. It's a very natural way to speak. However, to your point, if it's overkill, it's very hard to listen to. But, some people also are not made for speaking on a podcast. Some people just naturally are not good at it. I am lucky why I naturally just have this energy that just explodes very, very heavy. Some people love it. Most people love it. Some people probably find it really annoying. I don't care. I can't control it. But not everyone's like me. Some people are very mellow, like Alex Friedman, where he's hard to listen to because he's boring, right? But some people love that style because it's very informative. So it's really a find your style. Paying for media training is interesting because it can definitely help. But I'd say be careful, because what are you going for? Are you going for like to be on Don Lemon, or are you going for to be on a Tim Ferriss, or are you going for to be on a Talking with Tarashuk? Because they're very, 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 very different.
That's an excellent point. Know your goal, because the type of training, there's the basic training, eliminate too many ums and ahs, learn how to enunciate, learn how to relax when you're on camera. That's the basic level that would apply to all. But then to your point, speaking on Don Lemon versus you versus Tim Ferriss, different style, and recognizing you need those 10-second answers versus the conversation, but still have a clear selling point if you're on Tim Ferriss, right, versus we're just going to have a conversation. Let's just go with it.
Yeah. It's like, people, it's like, well, how do we do that? So what do you mean? Have you not talked to someone before? Like, it's this, you just talk. You just talk. And this is good practice to talk. Like, I call podcasting the purest form of communication. If you're trying to get a point across. Because I do. It's very easy for me to just talk. And sometimes, like, I find myself asking more questions to people in real life now. And sometimes I kind of snap out, like, Will, you're at a football game, like at your friend's house. Don't treat it like a podcast. Just be normal. But, I find myself asking people more questions. I find myself being more curious, which is fantastic. And that all comes from, I guess, clear talking points.
Well, to your point, I have found more and more podcasts are taking the conversational style as opposed to, okay, we're going to go through 8 questions. Here are the 8 questions.
Yeah.
I do get a few of those on some of the very formal business ones I go to. But even a lot of business ones I'm on, they say, yeah, this is just going to be a conversation. And we're going to talk about this. And we've gone way off path for what we set. We might not get into dancing and other things. We're still talking about leadership or HR or whatever we happen to be talking about on the show, but not in the direction we expected. But it's a free-flowing conversation. It gets really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, like I have a page and a half of like bullet points here for questions in case I get off the rails and want to get back to it. But that's it. That's really all I do. When I eventually do these in person, that's going to be interesting. Like, do I have these printed out and have them on a table? That's something I'm still trying to figure out because, I have 3 things open. I got an audition open. I got the document open, and I have the Zoom call open so I can actually see you all on one screen on my TV right there, which is reflected in my glasses, which really pisses me off. I gotta fix. It drives me crazy, the reflection of my glasses.
You need to get the anti-glare screens. I think that might cut it down.
Maybe. We'll see. I mean, I try to have as much lighting in here as possible too, but like I'm looking at it, and what can I do? Get over it. I'm talking to myself right there. But one of your last points is buy a decent mic, and the key word there is decent, because I love that you said decent, because I love this microphone. It's my baby. But it took me 5 years till I was ready to buy it. Not because I couldn't afford it, because, this is a commitment. This mixer I'm using, the Rodecaster Pro, is a commitment. Buy a decent mic. If it's just going to be you, USB mic's fine. I recommend Blue Yeti. Go to our shop. You can buy one. We get help for that. Reach out to me. I can help you which mic you want to buy. Exactly. See? Blue Yeti. Magnificent, even though it's red. So, decent mic is phenomenal advice. Yeah,
and it's funny. I talk to lots of podcasters, and there are some who are audiophiles. They talk about these $300, $500 mics, which I'm sure are fantastic. And maybe if you're a podcaster, it's worth doing that because you're doing who knows how many podcasts. Right. If you are going to be a guest, and you might be going on a dozen podcasts, to your point, a USB mic. First, you need an external mic. You can't use your laptop mic. Right. But getting that external mic, I'm not singing. I'm not doing something where you have to get the crispness of each and every thing I'm doing. You can hear the words. Even if I kind of mumble a little, I'm still coming across, and the mic's good enough for picking that up. And so you just need a decent enough mic that they can pick up the words, they can pick up your tone. So invest in a decent mic. Do not ever use your laptop mic. You can get the Blue Yetis are probably like $100 some. Even if you bought like a $50 mic, it is still far better than your laptop mic. So as a guest, buy a decent one. If you're a host, okay, then you might want to buy a good one because you're going to be doing a lot of these.
Right. Yeah. Sometimes if I'm in a work meeting where I know I'm just like, okay, someone big's going to be here. I'll whip out this setup just to show off. Just because I can, just for no reason other than, yeah, this is what I got. Because otherwise, I can't find it. It's over there somewhere. I just have like a regular gaming headset just for work because, I don't need all this. This is just fun. All right. I think that's a good place to wrap it up. So how does this podcast compare with the other 200 you've been on? I was going to ask that after the fact. You know what? Screw it. I'll do it on there. You can be as brutally honest. Like don't rank me, but how does Talking with Tarashuk, are there other podcasts? That's also what I'm curious in. Are there other podcasts like mine out there?
This is probably one of the most open podcasts. The closest I've done to this, there was a little bit of everything, and I'm blanking on the name of the host, where she just says, yeah, we're going to talk about a different topic each week. Here's our guest, and here's what we're talking about. When I was on the 500 Section Lounge, they're let's just talk about stuff. We wound up talking about the MIT Pirate Certificate. We talked about my background. We talked about the book. We talked about ballroom dance. We talked about all these different areas in a very open one to the next. So this was similar to that in that we hit a whole bunch of different topics that might not even be that related. So I'd say it's closest to that. But this is probably really the biggest, widest range of topics we've covered in a very broad sense.
Good. I like being unique. What kind of when you're a guest, what kind of podcast do you prefer to be on? Do you like the free-flowing conversation like we've just had, or do you like kind of the more structured Q&A format?
Closer to free-flowing. I don't like one of the first podcasts I did, they said, give me 8 questions. I gave them some questions, and then she just read off. First question, I answered it. Then she went to the second question and answered it. And that just felt so static.
Yeah.
I don't mind where they say, hey, I've got some questions. I think we're going this direction, but then it just organically evolves. So it is sometimes nice to have, I know where we're trying to go, because I can also, to your point earlier, I can help guide us back there. Oh, I know if you want to make sure to get to this later, as I give this answer, I'm going to give us that thread to lead us to where you want to go.
Right.
It's hard to do when we're just going to talk and see where it goes.
All right. I like it. Yeah, because it drives me crazy. It's the Q&A. I ask a question, you answer, I ask another question. I take pride in my follow-ups. I do, secretly. It's something I think I'm really good at. It's like, because a lot of the questions I ask on this podcast, I think of while you're answering. Like, yes, I'm looking at my notes saying, okay, where can I go next? But it's like, okay, let me sneak this in here. So that's just, and that's when it takes practice. But
the better hosts do that. They are paying attention. They say, this was interesting. I didn't expect it, but I think there's value, and they can recognize the value and they can shift to get it.
Yeah. Like when I wrote down, tracking criminals in the dark web, ... explain, I didn't know we were going into Facebook. I didn't really think of it. It just popped in my brain at that moment. I didn't ask specific questions in the doc so I could leave it open-ended for myself. But okay, last question. What's next for you?
For me, I'm continuing to go on podcasts and promote the book. I'm doing a lot more speaking now that we're getting towards the tail end of the COVID pandemic. COVID's not going away. It will still be here for years to come, but we're getting back to a new normal state. So there's a lot more in-person events. So I'm doing a lot more speaking at companies, at conferences, at universities. So that's been great. I'm focused a lot on that this quarter. And then probably I mentioned I'm a fractional CTO, but I'll probably get back into something full-time because I usually prefer being with a single full-time company.
Well, if I could afford it, I'd definitely think about it, but I definitely cannot. So actually, I always give the floor to the guest. Any questions you have for me? The last question should always go to the guest. Or you can plead the fifth. It's up to you.
Question street. All right, let's do, because you opened the kimono on recording. How was I as a guest?
Man, you were a lot of fun. You were a lot of fun. I mean, I go through your website, and again, I go, ooh. Like I see, you develop new ventures at startups and Fortune 500s. Ooh, you have all these degrees. Ooh, you're tracking criminals. Ooh, it's like, okay, I have something to work with here. And for me, I probably should listen to you on, or you as, the metaphorical you, if they're on other podcasts more to see what you're like. But, I went in no expectations. I had to go in and just, feel you out from the jump. And as soon as you got on, we started talking. I was like, okay, this is going to be a good one. So, and that comes with time. I've probably interviewed close to 50 different people now. I've discussed with 50 different people now, so I can get a good feel for it. But yeah, man, this was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed this one. I took a lot away personally. It's great. I know we're going to keep in touch one way or the other.
Well, thank you. And I'll share something for potential guests who are listening out there. I actually vary how I sound from one podcast to another. I will try to match the host's tone, not just a literal tone of voice. But here, this is a pretty relaxed podcast. I've got relaxed body position, and we're just chatting, and I'm treating it as you're treating it, like we're just hanging out, having coffee, chatting. If you hear me on certain other podcasts, some are like this, others, a lot of the more formal business ones, you're going to hear me with a much more professorial tone, where I sound just a little more on stage, a little more focused in how I speak, in my diction, because I'm going to match that style for that particular podcast. So I'll adjust slightly. I'm still me, but do I do like the super high energy and, we're just shouting out? Are we having the casual conversation? Or am I more professorial? And I will adjust to match the style of that particular podcast.
That's very important. You know what? I'm gonna take that and put it in my back pocket, because I'm gonna remember that one. Because I think I'm the same on all podcasts, no matter what. But you know what? You can catch me on all my other podcasts. I'll do all my plugs. But first, Mark, this is the part of the show where you do all your plugs, where they can find you, your socials, your book, anything you want to plug, my friend. The floor is yours.
Thank you. If you want to learn more about me and the book and the stuff I do, you can go to my website, thecareertoolkitbook.com. You can see what the book is about. You can go to the contact page and reach out to me, or follow me on social media, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter. I post them all. You can follow the blog if you want to get more content. You can look at some of those 200 plus other shows to hear what I sound like on those. You can also download the free app that has a lot of the great tips from the book in the Android and iPhone stores, and that's linked from the website. And then there's a whole resources page where I link to a bunch of other great books that I found useful in my career, some I reference in my book. It also references a bunch of other free online resources on the web that you can use for yourself, for your business. There's some download guides that can help you develop these skills at your organization for yourself or for others. So all of this is on my website, thecareertoolkitbook.com.
All right, now it's my turn. Ladies and gentlemen, that has been Mark Herschberg, author of the Career Toolkit, Essential Skills for Success That No One Taught You. If you want to find all of my stuff, all of my other interviews on the Talking with Tarashuk podcast, head over to ambiguouspodcastsolutions.com. Click that podcast tab and look for my face. It's a vector image. It's me as an animation with my gray streak. It's there. I promise you. It's gorgeous. Shout out to my girlfriend for making that logo for me. All my other guests can be found there. If you want to catch me on the Ambiguous Podcast Solutions, same website, ambiguouspodcastsolutions.com, where I speak to all people I find interesting. The one caveat is they have to have a podcast. This is Talking with Tarashuk, where I speak to everyone I find interesting. One caveat, they cannot have a podcast. And if you think you're interesting and want to reach out to me, you can find me at will@apspodcast.com. That's will@apspodcast.com. Send me your media kit. And if I go, ooh, you will be a guest on either podcast. It's easy peasy. It's super fun. We'll talk for about an hour just like this. So if you had fun listening to this, I'll have fun talking to you. Again, that's will@apspodcast.com. All of our partners, our podcast partners, our great podcast partners, can be found at ambiguouspodcastsolutions.com. If you're interested with working with us, please shoot me an email. Let us know. It'll be great to talk to you. I'll be back next time with a brand new guest talking about, I don't know. We'll see. I'll figure out when I get there. Until then, y'all take care.